First thing first, there are two primary sources that I correlated to this event. Firstly, the interview of the director of Democracy Now! With the one of the protesters that involved in historic 1965 Selma to Montgomery March. The channel broadcast his in-studio interview from 2012 when he cries out recalling the historic dramatic incident. During the event, he is John Lewis as a 25-year-old man that also helped to lead in 1965. He recalls being nearly killed by police on what became known as Bloody Sunday, which pushed the country to pass the Voting Rights Act. The second source is historical document published in the National Archive website, which an act to enforce the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, also known as the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This act was signed into law on 6 August 1965 by President Lyndon Johnson. Since African Americans face huge challenges to voting, including poll fees and other bureaucratic boundaries that deny them the opportunity to vote, as well as physical assault while attempting to register or vote. As a result, African American voter registration and political influence were restricted. After the act was approved, they were allowed to register to vote and engage in political process in majorly greater numbers.
So next, I'm going to talk about the strengths and limitations of this movie as historical evidences. Firstly, this movie has helped raise awareness and spark interest among people in the society. Selma has been successful in bringing attention to an important chapter in American history. This film has helped raise awareness among broader audience in Selma, which can encourage further exploration and study in the civil rights movement. Moreover, the portrayal of Martin Luther King in this movie has been widely praised for its authenticity and capturing essence of King's leadership and charisma. This depiction provides viewers with a glimpse into King's role in organizing the marches and advocating for voting rights. However, there are weaknesses in this movie as historical evidences. While Selma portrays key events and captures the spirit of the time, it does take some artistic liberties and condenses timeline for dramatic effect. Some historical inaccuracies have been pointed out, such as the portrayal of President Lyndon B. Johnson as initially opposed to voting rights, when in reality he had been supportive of the cause. Other than that, this film only primarily focuses on the experiences of Martin Luther King and African American activists involved in the Selma marches. While this involves valuable insights into their perspectives, it may not fully capture the diverse range of individuals and groups involved in the movement or provide a comprehensive view of the broader historical context.
So, I'm going to explain the credibility for this movie. The credibility for this movie did not pass as the script writing for this movie was being rewritten because they cannot use Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s actual words. This is because his speech remains under copyright and has licensed the film's right exclusively to Warner Bros. And DreamWorks. Other than that, the bombing part in the movie was not related to Selma to Montgomery March as the bomb event, which is called the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing happened on September 15, 1963, while the march on March 7th until March 21st, 1965. They put the scene to dramatize the plot more so it can set the stage of racial tensions and unrest in the South. Lastly, one of the protesters, 26-year-old Jimmy Lee Jackson, played in the movie by Keith Stanfield, was killed in the nearby cafe. According to the eyewitness, police troopers stormed the cafe, attacked Jackson's grandfather and mother, and then shoot Jackson at close range before fleeing. In the film, Jackson appears to die in his mother's arm shortly after being shot, but he actually died over a week later in the hospital.
To test for the consistency, I will appoint these two events and statements. The first event is the march from Selma to Montgomery, the last one. In the movie, the situation, the specific scene, the movement of people were accurately the same with the original video of the march. So in what ways it were accurate? The protesters were marching the 54-mile route from the Selma to Montgomery, led by Martin Luther King, or we know him as Dr. King. The people walked along the Edmund Pettus Bridge holding the American flags with those contagious smiles that shows the freedom and the new energy for them. So the second part is the Statement of Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson, or we know him as President Johnson, that was aimed to give the right for African Americans to vote. This act ensures that the right of vote will not include the aspects of race, color, and previous condition of servitude. After that, U.S. Congress started to enact the law which emphasized about interfering one's right to vote could be a crime under both 14th Amendments, 1868, and 15th Amendments. In this movie, it shows consistency when the movie portrays Lyndon Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 with Dr. King besides him.
So I am going to talk about the corroboration of this movie with other historical sources. So this is the scene. This is the scene of the Selma March movement from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, which is portrayed in the movie. So in order to corroborate this scene that I have shown you before with other historical sources, I have found a few pieces of evidence that can prove the existence of the scene in this movie. So these are the pictures of Selma March movement from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama that I have found at Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is located in Washington, D.C., United States. So look at this. Yeah.
The anachronism that can be found in this movie is Jimmy Lee Jackson is murdered by the Alabama state trooper while trying to protect his mother and grandfather from being beaten in a cafe. However, Jackson was shot and passed away immediately on his mother's lap. So, this is anachronism because in real life, a trooper twice shot 26-year-old Jackson inside a restaurant. Unlike in the movie, he didn't pass away on the restaurant floor. Instead, he stumbled back outside and was beaten even more severely. He died 8 days later. So the reason behind this anachronism is they exaggerated the story of Jimmy Lee Jackson because they want to create a dramatic conflict. They are made to appeal to emotion and tell a compelling story, even if the story is not the whole truth.
The event that I will be talking about is the Bloody Sunday March. The Bloody Sunday March in Selma was a pivotal event in the civil rights movement. One of the factors contributed to the occurrence of the march is the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Prior to the Bloody Sunday March, the fatal shooting of Jimmy Lee Jackson, a young African-American man, by a state trooper during a peaceful protest in Marion, Alabama, had heightening tensions and added the urgency of the civil rights movement in the region. In response to the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, the civil rights leaders right away planned a march from Selma to the state capital Montgomery to protest and draw attention to the issue of voting rights. The purpose of the march was to peacefully demonstrate the need for change and the urgency of federal intervention. Besides that, the implications of the Blood March to Malaysia is the importance of non-violent resistance. The emphasis on non-violent resistance in the Selma marches can serve as an inspiration and reminder of the power of peaceful protest in advocating for change. In Malaysia, various movements and activists have employed non-violent methods to address social and political issues such as the Bersih movement for electoral reform and the fight for indigenous rights. Furthermore, there are several historical sources that provide insights into the events depicted in the movie. One of them is contemporary newspaper articles and magazines from the time, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Ebony magazine. They provide valuable insights into how the events in Selma were reported and understood by the media and the broader public. Therefore, individuals can gain a deeper understanding of the events depicted in Selma as they provide multiple perspectives and help to paint a more comprehensive picture of the significant period in American history. Other than that, one of the facts in this film is the role of civil rights organizations. Selma highlights involvement of these organizations such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference SCLS, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee SNCC in organizing and supporting the Selma to Montgomery marches. These organizations played a crucial role in the broader civil rights movement. Lastly, the lessons that can be learned from the Bloody March in Selma is the importance of voting rights. The Selma marches emphasize the critical importance of voting rights as a fundamental pillar of democracy. The struggles faced by American Africans in Selma highlighted the deeply entrenched voter suppression tactics that denied marginalized communities their voices in the democratic process. The fight for voting rights demonstrated that access for the ballot box is essential for underrepresented communities to advocate for their interests and bring about meaningful change. This lesson continues to resonate today as it reminds us of the ongoing struggle for justice, equality, and the importance of collective action in addressing systemic injustices. That's all from me.
Okay, so one of the reasons for the Bloody Sunday March occur is to demonstrate the opposition to the unfair treatment towards African Americans by the aggressive police officers who treat them unequally and keep them apart in many sectors of life. African Americans also forbids to access various public facilities including school, public transits, and political office. They had little economic and political opportunities. The differential treatment of African Americans was also visible in the criminal justice system, particularly in terms of punishment, where the white Americans got lesser punishment compared to the black ones, even though they commit the same crimes. This march contributes to drawing attention to this injustice, regardless of race. Because of that, the implication of this event indirectly helped to increase political engagement to bring attention to the injustice suffered by African Americans. Meanwhile, in Malaysia, it promotes better equality and justice toward any races since Malaysia consists of various races of about 80 races. For example, the government can provide any support in various forms, including financial support, regardless of birth status and race alone. Other historical source that I got related from this movie is the result of study from historians, including eyewitness account from protesters that was published in the National Park Service. This team of historians who studied the original event told what was actually occurred during the march. They provide a more detailed understanding of the events and their significance. For instance, some of the protesters joined in this event are Jose Williams, John Lewis, and Amelia Poynton. Some fact that I got from this movie is this film depicts the involvement of civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King and John Lewis in organizing the march and advocating for voting rights. They organized peaceful demonstrations and marches to bring attention to the issue of voting rights and to put pressure on politicians to take action to defend the voting rights of all Americans. Because of their contributions, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed in the wake of Bloody Sunday to ensure African Americans had equal access to the voting. Last but not least, the lesson that is played from the Bloody Sunday March is the event itself teaches us about the power of the media in shaping public opinion. For example, news of the Bloody Sunday events contributed to raising consciousness of the racial injustice that African Americans suffered and boost support for the civil rights movement. In general, pointing out the brutality of the police response to the protesters helped to show their support for the civil rights movement. Also, the media supported the speech by the civil rights leader, which is Martin Luther King, in speaking out against racial injustice. By bringing the struggle of them against the inequality treatment, it can help to gain support for the movement to make change for the society.
3. So the first individual part is one reason that led to the events. So on September 15, 1963, 4 little African American girls died in the 16th Street Baptist Church, Birmingham, Alabama, due to a dynamite bomb that exploded in the back stairwell. So we can say that this incident also influenced why the march took place. Without the right to vote, they are unable to defend their race because the law is monopolized by white people who are biased in holding their position. Sadly, criminals are protected by white officials elected by white voters only. The second part is implication of the event of the local history is to combat injustice. As stated in the Surah An-Nahl, verse 90, indeed Allah orders justice and good conduct and help to relative and forbid immorality and bad conduct and oppression. So as a Malaysian citizen, we live in a multiracial country. So we need to rise up whenever there's racial prejudice happen around us. For example, when we saw someone regardless of his race being oppressed, we should have the courage to clean our face and fight for them. So we need to work hand in hand to build a world without racism and eradicate the stigma. So the third part is other historical sources related to the movie is the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute Lorraine Motel that located in the US. So this motel is where the Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. They used this motel as a sign of commemoration. Also, this museum tells the chronology of the sacrifices of the marchers against injustice. So one example of fact from the movie is Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership in organizing and mobilizing the civil rights movement in Selma. It portrays his role in strategizing and coordinating the marches, as well as his speeches and effort to advocate for voting rights. The last part is lesson that can be learned from the movie is the importance of the leader. Leader lead their people by developing strategy, knowing when to advance and when to retreat, comforting people during difficult time, and communicating clearly with the outside world at critical moment. So we need to inspire by the attitude of the leader who always put his people first in any circumstances. For example, King was making a smart decision, which is a protest in order to put pressure on the president to not take the voting issue lightly.
The event that I choose is the approval demonstration by Judge Johnson. It is an event where the Judge Johnson gave permission to the Negro citizens and also the people that participated in the march to cross the bridge. What bridge is the Edmund Peters Bridge that is located along the river of Alabama in Selma. So you might be wondering why and how this approval is being given by the judge, right? It is because the Negro citizens they could not stand with the people being attacked by the troopers, the Alabama State Trooper that caused many deaths of the citizens. And some of the citizens and also outsiders that are perished was Jimmy Lee Jackson and also James Reeb. James Reeb was the young white minister that participate in the march during the marching with Negro citizens, to show here that it is not only the troopers does not only attack those Negro citizens, but they also attack those who participate in the march, either you're the Negro citizens or not. And the implication that can be measured in Malaysia is the presence of solidarity during the approval of the session given by the Judge Johnson. In Malaysia, the Malaysia government should give and should open the opportunity, the chances, not only for Malaysia, but not only for the Malays, but also other races such as the Indians and also the Chinese to participate in such programs or activities that has been set by the Malaysia government. Moving on to the example of the historical source. The example of the historical source is the text given by the President to the Governor George Wallace. In the text, in order to obey the court, he provided such assistance from selected units of the Alabama National Guard and other available police units to ensure they could march happily without hesitation and also without getting any injuries. So the example of fact is thousands of people came to Selma aroused by Sunday's brutal acts, which is their first march exacted by the officials of the Selma and the state of Alabama. So the lesson I learned throughout this event is that we should not wait for something bad to happen to drive our consciousness towards the consequences that may happen on things that we are aware of. So instead, think truly when applying certain decisions so it won't affect the people around us. That's all for me.
The event I am going to talk about is the Selma voting right movement. After the violence that occurred on Bloody Sunday, Dr. Martin Luther King and other civil rights activists organized a number of non-violent demonstrations and marches in Selma to promote voting rights. They wanted to highlight the racial inequalities and systemic discrimination that faced by African American voters. One reason that led to the Selma voting right movement is to oppose and expose these unfair practices or discriminatory practices by gathering local activists, civil rights organizations and community members. Through non-violent demonstrations and acts of civil disobedience, this movement aimed to draw public attention to the problem of voting restriction. The activists planned protests, march and other forms of civil disobedience in an effort to draw attention to the injustice and demand that government step in to defend voting rights. The implication of the Selma voting right movement is it can give inspiration for activism in Malaysia. People and organizations involved in activism and social movements in Malaysia may have found inspiration from the movie's portrayal of grassroots activism, non-violent protest, and the power of group action. It might have inspired individuals to fight for their rights and promote positive changes. One example of historical sources in Selma is the Why We Cannot Wait book, which is written by Dr. Martin Luther King in 1964. The civil rights movement, especially the events at Selma, are detailed in this book. This book also provides King's opinions, strategies, and understandings of the fight for racial justice and voting rights. So one example of fact from the movie is the Selma March were a group of members that went from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama in 1965. These demonstrations were planned to oppose voter suppression and demand voting rights for African Americans. A lesson that we can learn from Selma voting right movement is courage when facing adversity. In the face of threats, intimidation, and physical violence, the Selma marches show unbelievable courage. The events of Bloody Sunday, in which state policemen violently attacked non-violent protesters on the Edmund Peters Bridge, serve as a reminder to us of the extraordinary courage of people who were willing to risk their lives in order to protect voting rights. Their determination and persistence serve as an example to us, reminding us of the courage needed to confront wrongdoing and work for a society with greater justice. The Selma March's courage serves as an example and a reminder of the strength of human spirit in the face of overwhelming difficulties. It also serves as an example to the success of peaceful resistance and people's willingness to sacrifice their own safety in the name of equality and a better world. The marchers refuse to be scared despite the dangers involved. They demonstrate persistent determination and a firm dedication to justice, equality, and the right to vote. Their courage was demonstrated not only by their readiness to confront violence, but also their willingness to maintain non-violent values even in the face of criticism. That's all.
Next, we are moving on to the next event, which is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The political thoughts and behind-the-scenes work to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965 are highlighted in the films. Voting rights received increased attention in 1964 after a number of non-violent protests were organized by civil rights activists and met with significant violence. President Johnson and Congress passed significant and effective national voting rights legislation as a result of the murder of voting rights activists in Mississippi and the attack by white state troopers on non-violent protesters in Selma, Alabama. This event gained national attention. Johnson's political savvy and the public's disgust with the violence encouraged Congress to adopt the voting right law on August 5, 1965. This historic piece of legislation attempted to safeguard the voting rights of African Americans and end discriminatory measures like literacy tests and poll tests that were used to eliminate black voters. Next, we are going to use the implication of the event to the local history. Since the Reconstruction era following the Civil War, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 marked the most important fundamental change in the relationship between the federal and the states government with regard to voting. It was promptly contested in courts. The Supreme Court delivered multiple significant rulings between 1965 and 1969 supporting the validity of Section 5 and the wide variety of voting practices for which clearance was necessary. The Voting Rights Act made a difference instantly. A third of 25,000 new black voters registered by federal examination by the end of 1965. Movies frequently act as starting point for dialogues about social problems in our culture. The movie Selma may have inspired discussions in Malaysia regarding issues including social justice, human rights, and racial injustice. A deeper knowledge of past and present efforts for inclusion and equality may result from these dialogues. Next, we are going to see the example of other historical sources related to the movie. Documentary film and recorded interview are some of the additional historical sources that are relevant to the film. Additional historical material include a variety of documentaries and recorded interviews with activists, historians, and academics. We can better grasp the events and their historical context thanks to the professional analysis, archival film, and art interview and that frequently include in these audio-visual assets. For example, you can find many interviews about Selma to Montgomery March on YouTube and NBC News. We can also find the speech of Martin Luther King Jr. about the black people voting rights that had been uploaded on YouTube. Next, moving on to the fact from the movie. For your information, President Lyndon B. Johnson's involvement was accurately portrayed by Tim Wilkinson. The conversations and talks between President Lyndon B. Johnson and civil rights activists, especially Martin Luther King Jr., are depicted in the film with accuracy. It showed the political challenges that President Johnson dealt with and his eventually support for the Voting Rights Act enactment. Last but not least, a lesson that can be learned from the event. Lesson that we can learn from the event is that we cannot give up easily when we are fighting for our rights, even though we are part of the minority. If the changes are valid and good for the community, we should try our best to make the change. As we can see in the movie, the black people were trying their best to fight for their voting rights. Other than that, we can put in mind that if we find something impossible, we honestly can make it possible. How? By doing our best and never losing hope. Like in the movie, the black people worked very hard to get their voting right, even in the face of a segregationist system that wanted to make it impossible. Thanks to their hard work, black people are now can vote for their rights. That's all for me. Thank you.